colleagues, students, esteemed guests, and ladies and gentlemen, it is with great honor that I introduce Professor Yu Xie, the eminent Bert G. Kustater 66 University Professor of Sociology at Princeton University. Professor Xie is also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, Academia Sinica, and the National Academy of Sciences. Today, we are privileged to have Professor Xie present his enlightening lecture titled Economic Inequality and the Demographic Outcomes in China. With a distinguished research career, Professor Xie's contributions to the fields of social stratification, demography, statistical methods, and Chinese studies have been nothing short of remarkable. His stellar academic record includes publications such as Marriage and Cohabitation and Is American Science in Decline, showcasing his unwavering commitment to advancing our understanding of complex societal issues. Today's lecture holds particular significance as we navigate the era of rapidly advancing artificial intelligence. The rapid progression of AI technology brings forth optimism, hopes, and new opportunities, but simultaneously raises concerns and anxieties about job displacement and widening income gap across individuals, countries, and regions. By examining intergenerational mobility, marriage dynamics, fertility rates, and mortality patterns, Professor Xie offers a comprehensive view of the challenges arising from economic disparities. Okay, so before we welcome Professor Xie to give his lecture, let's take some photos. Okay, so Professor Xie and Professor Alfred Ho, can you come to the stage to take a picture together? And then after that, we will take a group photo with the audience.
Thank you, Professor Wang, for the introduction. Thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be back at City U. I was here quite a long time ago to review the school, indeed, and this is the second time I'm visiting City U. I've been working on inequality and demography in China for more than 20 years, and in this talk, I'm going to give you a summary of my research program on income inequality and demographic outcomes in China. So some of the messages are quick, but then I'll give you details later. So in case you have to leave after 10 minutes into the talk, so I'm going to give you two summary messages from my talk. One, today's China is very different from China in the past. So there have been tremendous social changes in China. Not only China is different from the past, its own past, China is also different from other countries in the world. So I'm going to emphasize China's unique trajectory in both inequality as well as demographic outcomes. China is not the same as the US. I studied both US and China, and in my experience, that China is quite different, at least more different than many of my colleagues believe. So I'm going to try to show you why China is different. Some of that is cultural. So let me give you an outline. In part one, I'm going to give you an overview of economic inequality in China. In part two, I'm going to focus on intergenerational mobility, how parents' socioeconomic status affects children's socioeconomic status. That's called intergenerational mobility. And third, I'm going to focus on marriage. Marriage has always been important in China. I'm going to tell you how marriage has changed in recent decades in China. And fourth, a lot of people ask me about this, you all know about this, is fertility. China has been in low fertility. Why is it? Would it change in the future? And how income equality is related to fertility. And fifth, how income inequality is related to health and mortality and its implications for mortality. First, overview. So these are a long list of references, and those are only selected pieces that our team has published on economic inequality. And this is a well-known chart that we published in 2014. And we compare the trends in income inequality to trends in the US in income inequality. So in the how do I go back? Okay. In purple, you see a line representing Gini coefficient in the US, and we know that trend has been going up over the last few decades. And this is well known, well documented. Indeed, this trend in the US has generated a large industry in US economics, in sociology and political science. Many US-based researchers have studied the increase in income inequality over decades, of recent decades, and its implications for social policy and for domestic issues in the US. But that increase, even though it's obvious and also quite important, pales in comparison to the trend in income inequality in China, in the red line. The upward trend in income inequality in China has been much sharper, starting from income inequality Gini coefficient around 0.3, which is quite low, all the way to over 0.5. The Chinese government, however, has reported lower levels of inequality in purple. In purple are trends given as official numbers of Gini by the State Statistical Bureau. And our research team have concluded that those official numbers have understated, for political reasons, the true levels of income inequality in China, because the government sometimes reports a lower level for political reasons. And how do we know that? We have been involved in data that have been collected by research institutes affiliated by several universities. Myself, I've been involved in CFPS, China Family Panel Studies, that's conducted by Peking University. Some of you may use the data for your research. General Social Survey, CGSS, has been conducted by Renmin University. And that's an entirely different operation, using different sample, different instruments. And then CLDS is a labor force survey conducted by Zhongshan University in Guangzhou. Again, it uses different sampling, different procedure, and different team of research. And China Household Finance Survey has been conducted by Southwest University of Economics and Finance. Again, those 4 universities have collected 4 independent survey samples, and we use their data. We estimate true level inequality. They all give numbers higher than 0.5, higher than official numbers given by the State Statistical Bureau. So because survey data from different universities are so consistent, giving higher numbers than official statistics, we concluded that official numbers somehow have been manipulated to underreport true levels of income inequality. China's income inequality is high, not only in comparison to its past, it's high also in comparison to other countries with similar levels of economic development. So in this figure, we compare China's trends in the last few decades to numbers that are from different countries, and we only x-axis, we have per capita GDP representing economic development. And this is a classic Kuznets curve criticized by Piketty, for example, because it's cross-sectional. You do see inverted U curve that income inequality goes high at the middle level of income, and then it goes down at the advanced level of income. But again, China's trajectory is very high, even in comparison to other countries, even comparison to other countries at the same level. Oh, it will go up to, oh my, this is high tech. Even in comparison to other countries at the same or similar levels of economic development. Not only we know China's income equality has been high, even ordinary respondents to our survey, CFPs, know that income equality has been high in China. The data here came from 2012 CFPS. And we asked them, what are the most important, significant social issues facing China? Number one is economic inequality, higher than government corruption, which was addressed later by Xi Jinping. This is the 2012 data. And then you have unemployment, environmental protection, health, housing, education, social security, and so on. So ordinary Chinese know that income inequality is high, is an important social issue facing China. In 2016, I published a thinking piece on inequality in China. I made 3 claims, and later, through various research projects, we verified, we examined those claims more systematically. So let me give you the 3 claims that I published in 2016. It's high, but high-level income inequality has been largely mediated by collective agencies, such as locales and work units. Income equality is high, but it's not all about individual family-level differences. A lot of the inequality is being generated and maintained at a collective level, such as locale and work units, not individual level. Second, traditional Chinese political discourse, Confucianism, for example, promoted a merit-based inequality. And this is especially culturally specific to China. People actually don't mind high-level inequality as long as inequality is justified somehow on the basis of merit. And why merit is acceptable? Because those who are rewarded high may have improved the collective well-being of the masses. So as long as Jack Ma or important entrepreneurial business people or political leaders have helped improve the well-being of others, high-level inequality or high reward to those individuals might be justified on the basis of merit. And that, we believe, is particular Chinese discourse is merit-based inequality. Third, many Chinese people regard high-level inequality as undesirable outcome, but they regard that as an inevitable price to pay for high-level inequality. Actually, some of the Deng Xiaoping's promotion of economic development allowed for high level of inequality. Let some people be rich. Let some people rich is allow inequality to be large for the time being because it promotes economic development. So somehow economic inequality is like many other things, like degradation of the environment is a price to pay for high-level economic development. So those were 3 claims. And collectively, the 3 claims meant that high-level economic equality is not a major political issue. It will not lead to political instability in the way many had feared at the time. And I've already said there are cultural factors for high-level inequality. And some of that actually is related to intergenerational mobility. And those are two different issues. Economic inequality is about distribution. It's based on one variable. Basically a variance of income. Intergenerational mobility is the relationship of two variables: socioeconomic status of the parents' generation and socioeconomic status of child's generation. Chinese have a very high level, have tolerance for high level of inequality. And not only in China, studies have also shown in Hong Kong, tolerance for high income inequality is pretty high. People are tolerant of high level inequality as long as it's justified on the basis of merit. Another important cultural factor is that social mobility was remarkably high in China's past, even in ancient time during empire, because if your family is poor, but if you can pass civil service examination, or today through Gaokao, you go to Tsinghua and Beida, then you can overcome family disadvantages, and then you can achieve high level of mobility. So those are, in some ways, cultural factors that made tolerance of income inequality high in China. And I actually learned that from work in psychology by my colleagues, Harold Stevenson and Stigler and Richard Nisbet and so on, when I was at Michigan. I learned some of that from my colleagues, American colleagues. I'll give you some example. This is recently published work with Guangyang Li. We all know this is a chart about the relationship between parents' own education and their expectation for children's education. It's always positive. That is, highly educated parents expect their children to have high levels of education. It makes sense. Higher the parents' education, the higher the education expectation they have for their children. However, the positive relationship between parents' own education and their education expectation for children is much, much stronger in Europe, here in Germany, than in the US. America, we think, is exceptional. It's a new world. Relationship is not as strong. That is, it's much more open in the US than in Germany. However, in the US, if you break down whites from Asians, we can see the relationship among whites, which is less steep than among Germans. This is for whites. But if you look at Asian Americans, it's even flatter. If you look at Chinese in China, it's also flat. And if you look in South Korea, it's also flat. What do we find is that among Asians, East Asians, their parents' expectation for children's education depends much less on parents' own education. So what do you have? You have a universal high education expectation for children, regardless of parents' own education. You want your child to be well-educated, whether you have education or not yourself. And that is unique. And you don't see that until you put data together and conduct a comparative study. Now that leads to the second topic, intergenerational mobility. The two are related. So one is about the distribution of one variable, income equality. Here again is represented by Gini coefficient. And then on y-axis is the dependency or relationship between father's earnings and children's earnings, the lower the mobility. And it has been postulated that the two are positively related. The higher inequality, the less the mobility. And this, again, is hypothesized for cross-sectional comparative data. So now let's look at China. China is different, not only for cultural reasons, but also for political reasons. We all know China has been ruled by the Communist Party of China. And the Communist Party of China founded the People's Republic of China in 1949. And when New China, People's Republic of China was founded, it had the explicit political objective of changing social stratification order. And that in that new social stratification order, it favored children from the red class, from worker class, from lower peasant class. The first A is for red class, and we trace their socioeconomic status. This is the percentiles from first generation, the revolutionary generation, to second generation, to third generation. And they have improved their socioeconomic status over time, over generation. Look at workers. They also improved their socioeconomic status from first generation, second generation, third generation. Poor peasants, they also improved their socioeconomic status over time. And the upper middle class has suffered their socioeconomic status from first generation, second generation, and third generation. Bad class, again, give way their socioeconomic status over time. This is all relative. Let's look at the relationship between parents' generation and child's generation. This is 2 generations, not 3 generations. And again, we compare China's trend to trend in the US. And it's well known in the US, and indeed for most developed countries, the relationship between parents' socioeconomic status and children's socioeconomic status has been relatively constant. And that is true in our data. It doesn't change much over time. This is for men, this is for women in blue in the US. Look at the trend in China. Again, this is a beginning of People's Republic. You can see very, very high intergenerational mobility. There's almost no relationship between children's socioeconomic status and parents' socioeconomic status. Again, at the founding of People's Republic, I'm bringing you back to history, the relationship was very, very weak, unusual. And then over time, you see the increase in the relationship between parents, this is occupational status, and children's occupational status. It got worse. Mobility has declined over time, but converges with the US level, not exceeding the US level. Look at educational mobility, very similar. The only exception is that women, especially in more detailed analysis, we showed rural women in rural China, even in the past have suffered. They had very low mobility even in the past. And we have a long discussion why this was true. But look at men. Social mobility was very high at the beginning of People's Republic. And now mobility has declined over time. So one story is that with economic reform, with the increase of income equality, social mobility in China has declined over cohorts. But is that a concern? In some way it is, but international comparison reviews, this is another AGS with Xiangzhou, another way of showing the same data. Intergenerational mobility has declined over time for China, but not to a level that will alarm us. Let me show you comparison. Again, the first chart is trend for China. So mobility has declined over time, only because China had a very high level of social mobility. And even for the most recent cohort, by international standards, it's still pretty high in comparison to European countries. China's social mobility, intergenerational mobility today is not at a level that will worry us because it has not exceeded levels we commonly see for European countries and for the US. So that's part 2. Let me move on to part 3. We've been studying family for some time, and we noticed tremendous social changes in Chinese family. So what's the most remarkable change I'm going to tell you? The most important change in Chinese family is the transformation of marriage from being universal marriage at the beginning of People's Republic of China in 1949, universal marriage meaning everybody would be married, to a different form of marriage that's socioeconomic status-based marriage, more selective marriage, status-related marriage. And I'm going to show you the data. And this is very remarkable because in most countries, including Hong Kong, for example, marriage has never been universal. China was an exception, was universal marriage. In this city, the high percentage of youths are not married, would not get married. But in China's past, the beginning of People's Republic, marriage was universal. What does it mean, universal? It means if you're rich, you have a rich marriage. If you're poor, you have a poor marriage, because everybody would have a marriage. And when I was young, it would be very surprising to see someone being bachelor for life. Hardly, maybe one person in the whole village, and very few of them in the whole town. You hardly know anyone who will stay as a single person for life. Things have changed. That was universal marriage. If you're poor, you can have a poor marriage. Today, marriage is more limited to those with socioeconomic status. That's a social change. Let me show you the data. We break down by cohorts. This is for men, this is for women. We have 3 cohorts, those born in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We now have data for 80s and 90s. But let me just show you the data from historical cohorts, male and female. And then in each chart, we break down the population by education attainment. As you can see, those who are educated would delay their marriage. But in the end, nobody stays as single. This is everybody start out being single. And this is absorbing state. So gradually with age, they leave the status of being single because they're getting married. By age 35, this is almost 0% of individuals will stay as single because everybody will be married off. And this is universal marriage. Regardless of your socioeconomic status, you'll be married. This was true for the cohort in the 50s and for the cohort who were born in the 60s. Look at most recent cohort, it's no longer true. If you have lowest level of education in China, primary school only, a quarter of them would not be married and would not be married for life. This is a new thing. This is a new trend emerging. Low status men. Not just low status men, it's also highly educated women would not get married. And my friends, I have many friends in demography, they say, oh, people in China don't get married because there's no women. There's a shortage of women. Yes, there is a shortage of women, but shortage of women will not create this gap because it is really matching. It's not a shortage because you still have highly educated women and you have access to women. But those are highly educated and they will not be matched to lowly educated men. It's not just number of supply, it is socioeconomic status matching that made two groups, highly educated women and lowly educated men, remain unmarried over time. We also look at housing. How do we know this is caused by economic status? Let's take a look at Shenzhen, one of the most expensive cities in China, and this is where the age of marriage is latest. So you have to see a positive association between housing price and age of marriage. People just couldn't afford to be married. You need money. And you can apply same reason to Hong Kong. High living cost, high housing cost keeps people from being married because marriage requires socioeconomic status and housing. What's the coping strategy? One result that surprised us actually is a change in spousal selection. And this is a trend over time in age homogamy, meaning that men and women will be of similar age will get married. When they marry, men, husband or wife, men and women will have similar age of marriage. Why? Because they know each other from school, from work. Usually it's a love-based marriage. You marry someone of your own age group. And this trend has been going up because China was a matched marriage. Now it's a love-based marriage. And homogamy has increased over time until cohort in the 60s. Then what would happen? You have a reversal of age homogamy. You will see young women marrying older men. Why older men? Because older men have spent more time in the labor market, have accumulated more wealth, and then become more attractive to younger women. So socioeconomic pressure has increased the age gap between husband and wife, and that is also driven by income inequality. And next chart is remarkable. You seldom find such a sharp increase. That's one solution is to marry someone older man. But another solution is that both from husband point of view, they would like to marry women of the same socioeconomic class. Women contribute, women's educational attainment has surpassed men in China, and they contribute a lot to household income. So not only women try to be married to men of sufficient economic status, but also men would like to marry women of comparable socioeconomic status. So this is measured by assorted mating. Assorted mating between husband education, wife's education was low for a cohort that was born 100 years ago. That was only 0.25, so it goes from 0 to 100. So a measure of assorted mating was low 100 years ago for a cohort that was born 100 years ago. But then gradually, it has gone up to all the way to 0.75, 0.8. And now in China, it's pretty much guaranteed that a college-educated man are matched to college-educated women, a PhD woman with PhD would be married a man with PhD. So you have very strong assorted mating that was not true before. Again, I've shown you tremendous social change over time, educational assorted mating. During COVID, we conducted online experiment. We asked our respondents what kind of person, hypothetical person, is a desirable marriage partner. So this is an experiment. So we randomly construct a profile of a potential marriage partner. The potential person could have age, income, family background, housing, property, education, appearance. We ask respondents to rate the person's desirability as a marriage partner. And what's the result? This is the result. age actually doesn't matter very much. If you look at physical appearance, men, like as in the past, I see many young faces here, they would like to have pretty women. Beauty is important. Actually, women also like to have handsome men. Physical appearance also matters, but less for women than for men. So we know this instrument works. But let's look at a socioeconomic status. Income is quite important, but income is far more important for women than for men, but it's important for both groups. And women in particular would prefer indoors in urban areas with urban hukou, because if they're married to a man of rural hukou, they feel huge obligation to help the son-in-law or in-law family. So that's undesirable. But also housing property is important. Education is important. All socioeconomic characteristics are important, especially for women. So money speaks. Socioeconomic status makes a person more desirable if they have those. And if they don't have those, they are less desirable as marriage partners. Let me move on to fertility. And we also think this is a reason for low fertility in China. First of all, through our analysis, especially desired number of children, we project a long-term low fertility in China. It's partly driven by parents' desire for children's high social mobility, undifferentiated by class. Remember the chart I showed you was Wang Yang. Even parents don't have high education. They would like their children to have high educational attainment. That's very different from the West. And that means in China, even parents of limited resources, limited education, would not want to have more children. They know the cost of additional children to the educational attainment of children. They understand sociology quite well. They don't want their children to be disadvantaged in competing for educational attainment, much more so in China than in other countries. Even among Asian Americans, fertility is also lower than other racial groups. So the desire for children's high educational attainment is part of the story. It's a story that was not documented until we began to work on the topic. So we have a lot of evidence. In this, I'm going to show you results from a paper that we published in 2021, again using data from China Family Panel Study. This is a kind of ecological analysis. We look at 4 characteristics of a locale: economic development, behavioral fertility rate, and local inequality, and finally, we say education pressure. How much education pressure is measured by number of tutoring institutions. That was before institutions were banned by Chinese government. We want to see the presence of educational density in the locale may have an effect on desired number of children. And this is the result. Economic development has a negative effect. Low fertility has a positive, local fertility has a positive effect. The higher the fertility, the more they believe should be desirable number of children, the higher the number. Inequality has a flat relationship, but look at education competition index. The higher the index, the lower the desired number of children. So competition for children's education drives down fertility. I'm almost at the end of my talk. Finally, I'm going to talk about implications of economic inequality for health and mortality. Again, the conclusion is also negative. That is, economic inequality is bad for population health. So we have done, first of all, we have documented through a number of research papers that socioeconomic differentials in health and mortality exist in China. There are people who deny its existence. What does it mean? It means that those with higher socioeconomic status are healthy, are less likely to be sick, and live longer. If you look at mortality, they have lower mortality and they live longer. They're healthy. Why? They have better lifestyle, they have better health insurances, they have better everything. And again, we're going to focus on inequality. Given very large increases in income inequality, and the income has a differential effect on health, especially on mortality. You can imagine, okay, let me show you summary statistics, then I'll come back to implications. If you look at, this is mortality. If you look at life expectancy trend over time, this is a observed life expectancy in China over time. What do you see? You see improvement. You see steady improvement in life expectancy in China. And especially since mid-60s and then 70s, and then you have gradual steady improvement in life expectancy. Chinese population lives pretty long, especially relative to level of economic development. So how do I know? Because we fit another line. This is the life expectancy predicted based on cross-sectional data for China's level of economic development. For China's economic development, predicted life expectancy should be much lower. So the gap between observed life expectancy and predicted life expectancy, you can call it premium. So China has enjoyed a large health premium because it provides much better public health relative to other countries the same level of economic development. I lived in countryside in the 70s, and Chinese people were pretty healthy at that time. They had a 赤脚医生, they had a basic medical services, and plus they also maintained a good lifestyle. In where I lived, in countryside, and Chinese government encouraged every family to drink so-called cooked water. You heat up water to 100% degree before you drink it, and that is a healthy practice. You don't need fancy medical services. You just drink healthy, safe water, and that improves life expectancy. So China enjoyed very large health premium for many decades until most recent time. In other words, the improvement in life expectancy in China has not kept pace with economic development in China. The increase, improvement in average level of economic well-being is much faster than the improvement in life expectancy. Why is that? We want to explain why is that. We think income inequality is one of many possible reasons. So why? Look at it this way. Money has an asymmetric relationship vis-a-vis life expectancy. You can give someone, a very rich person, additional money. It will not buy him or her much house because it's already exhausted. And the money, if it's transferred, hypothetically transferred to low-income people, you improve their health or life expectancy much more significantly. So population health is an average. The average will mathematically will suffer from inequality. If you reduce inequality, take more money out of the rich people and give it to poor people, the average will improve. That's simple. And same reason why, so I do a lot of comparisons, same reason why life expectancy is low relative to average income in the US, because the poor don't have basics. They cannot have basic provisions of health. They have high level of mortality. The rich, even though they have lots of money, their lives is not improved by having extra money. So income inequality mathematically has a negative consequences for population health. And we did a simulation. So I showed you my work with Xiangzhou. If we hypothetically had kept income inequality to a level in the 80s, early 80s, then life expectancy will be improved by half a year. That's significant in China for men and women. And at least half year average life expectancy is lost due to the increase in income inequality. That concludes my lecture today. Thank you very much.
Well, what an interesting lecture. Professor Xie has provided us with very comprehensive evidence on the demographic situation and its involvement in China. So now it's a Q&A session. We're going to take questions from the audience.
Okay, so a very simple question. Actually, you show us some very interesting graphs, but actually some of the data pretty old, more than 15 years now. So I just, actually I'm not working in this field. I just wondered, are the data not available for recent data?
Okay, very good question. I should have said something. Income inequality peaked around the time I showed you, 2012. That was a peak of income equality. After that, our data shows stability, and some will claim small decrease. So there is still a debate as to whether income equality has declined since or has been stable at the same similar levels since 2012. So we know income equality has not got larger since then. So that's pretty much a safe conclusion. And that has to do with Xi Jinping's regime in reducing poverty, reducing inequalities. A major objective of Xi Jinping's government is to fight inequality, increasing inequality. In some ways, he has been successful in not allowing inequality to increase further. So it has been at the same level. Some claim, there's little evidence if you see, there's been some claim there is been declining since then, but has not increased over time. We do have data, but we didn't publish those data. So there is a debate in the literature.
Okay, so any more questions?
Thank you very much. Very insightful, very good for us to get that long-term perspective. Could you say a little bit about the marriage structure? Because I read some, again, this is not my field at all, but I think the divorce rate in China is 50%. Everyone, two marriage, you get one divorce. And so that means the family structure is changing quite a bit and people get remarried. So how would that impact all the statistics you are showing?
Yeah. I did propose maybe I should give a lecture on marriage. I could give a lecture on marriage and family. Several things I can say. One is there is very late marriage age. So age of marriage has been pretty late. And that means they expect men to have established a career, have enough money. There is expectation, increasing expectation, they should have housing before they marry. That was not true before. 90% of couples did not have their own housing in the early cohort when they got married. Now 90% now will have housing before they got married. So the norm for housing has changed over time. That means late age of marriage. There is also increase in proportion who will never get married. Among those who are married, almost all of them will have at least one child. So you don't see couples without children. So the tie between childbearing and marriage is very, very high. Non-marital births is very low, is below 0.5%. It's almost absent in China. So you have a close relationship between marriage and childbearing. That means a woman will not have a child unless she's married, but she's married, she will have at least one child. The number of children within marriage doesn't vary very much. It's quite homogeneous. It's relative, one child and two children. You don't have a long tail. Another thing is that because age of marriage is so late, you have a huge change in sexual norm. So cohabitation is very high. People will have live together or have sex before marriage. And they use contraceptives because you have family planning programs. And so they resort to all forms of contraceptives, including abortion, not to have non-marital births. Divorce rate has been high, raw divorce rate has been high, but if you follow marriage cohort, how long they stay married before they divorce, China's divorce rate is lower still than Japan and US level. The raw numbers divorce rate high because divorce was not practiced earlier. So you have accumulation of couples who would have to be divorced before, but they will not be divorced. So as a lot of that low rate of divorce, we believe, is related to child education of children. So they stay together as a married couple until children grew up and go to college. So you do see unhappy married couples for the sake of children's education. That's also commonly practiced. So marriage, divorce is high, cohabitation is high. We call it second demographic transition. So in all aspects, China is like US or Europe, except non-marital births. So you have high cohabitation rate, you have non-marital sex, you have late age of marriage, you have relatively high divorce. Those are all similar to other developed countries, except the one, childbirth is limited to married couples. And that is a remarkable feature. We call it child-centeredness in Chinese family. Family's main function is to have a child and educate a child, a raise child. And that is different from Western societies. In Western society, in America, in Europe, childbirth is no longer associated with married couple. It could be out of marriage. It could also be quickly out of divorce families. But in China, it's still closely tied to a married couple. That's a quick summary of the other talk I could have given.
Yeah, thank you very much for this great lecture. I learned a lot. I have a question that is related to what you've said in terms of the comparison that you gave us also with the US, but also Europe.
Yeah.
So as far as I understood you correctly, the inequality remains on a pretty stable level since 2010 or 2012. Now, do you think this, in China, now do you think this is sustainable in the long run, or do you think that the inequality may approach more the American or even the European level? As far as I've seen your data, inequality is pretty low in some European countries. Do you think that this is also a trend that we will see in China in the long run, or do you think that China is more approaching the American model, or what are your expectations?
Yeah, this is about intergenerational mobility, I believe. I think there is some evidence that intergenerational mobility has been declining to a level that converges with other advanced countries, Europe and the US. But I don't think it will be worse than other countries. So it's getting worse, but to a level that's similar to advanced societies. Part of that is really market and income inequality. So I should back up a little bit. Remember, there was a Great Gatsby. What Great Gatsby curve said, the higher the income inequality, the lower social mobility. So in terms of income inequality, China is actually at the top. China's this number, China's income quality is much higher than US. It's much higher than in Europe. It's much higher in Japan. Actually, is one of the highest in the world. You can see this. It's very, very high. And according to Great Gatsby curve, social mobility should be much lower in China than other countries. So even China has similar level of intergenerational mobility. It's already remarkable in other countries because its income equality is much bigger. So this is a strange thing. So income equality is high in China, but intergenerational mobility has been relatively high. And that keeps people's complaint about income inequality low because it's high, it doesn't matter because my children could reach top. It's about distribution. So the expectation is that if I raise my children, send them to Beida and Tsinghua, they could be next billionaire. So I don't worry about having billionaire as long as my children have some chance of achieving there. And that will reduce political implications of income equality. So that is and today intergenerational mobility is declining to a level we believe is similar to Western levels. But if income equality goes down in China, we can expect intergenerational mobility to improve over time. So I'm not as worried. So there is more complaint about social rigidity in China. But I'm more optimistic because the government has worked, this is related to the first question, to reduce the level of income inequality and has succeeded in constraining the growth, the increase. So the increase in income inequality has not continued to grow over the last 10 years. And that gives me optimism that intergenerational mobility will not go out of hand, will not go a level that's lower than in Western countries.
Well, thank you so much for this inspiring talk. I think it's really thought-provoking. I don't work in this area, so a lot of these, when you talk about, are new to me. So I just have a question regarding, so you've showed us a lot of really cool statistics on how the long-term trajectory look like for the 5 dimensions you mentioned. And I was wondering, in your work, have you evaluated any specific policies, like which kind of policies are effective and which are not? And also a related question is, if you were to give some policy recommendations, what would you recommend?
It's a good question. You're from economics background? Yeah, economists like to evaluate policies. And that's their part. There's a professional kind of penchant. That's how you get a causal identification. You can publish AER and JPE because you have a funding instrument that allows you. I have not actually. We have traced. This is more, in some ways, is a descriptive or documentation of trend. The ones I know using our data have actually found negative evidence. For example, one big policy related to today's discussion is really about the restriction of tutoring institutions in China. That was a big policy that banned tutoring in China. You all know that, especially if you own Chinese stocks. The market really crashed the educational institutions in China. You probably know the government, I don't know how much this is in public discussion, but I think the restriction is being reconsidered right now, partly because the intended objective may not be accomplished. We don't know how well the banning education tutoring institutions will actually help reduce inequality in educational outcomes. Some researchers, economists claim that it's not helped because privileged families will find alternative ways of helping their children's educational outcomes. But I have not done such evaluations. In some ways, I have stayed away from evaluating government policies because I don't know. In some ways, I don't feel like our tools are good enough. In some ways, all of them based on assumptions of, say, regression discontinuity or quasi-experiment. Some of that work actually I find problematic. But again, this is a disciplinary approach. In economics today, if you don't have identification, you can never publish. Unfortunately, for some of us, we don't have to use identification, and there is no identification in what I present. There's one, the only identification I have today is on the marriage partner. That's experiment. So we did a randomized experiment to show that socioeconomic status improves a potential partner's, marriage partner's desirability, and that is causal. Other things are less causal. It's more descriptive.
Okay, so I'd like to invite more questions.
Professor Xie, thank you very much for the very enlightening lecture. I have a question related to my colleague. So you mentioned there are cultural factors for inequality. People accept inequality as long as it's merit-based, right? So what's your view about this inequality on the economic development? Do you think it plays a positive role of this inequality, which is merit-based, right, for economic development?
Again, this is economic consequences is something I thought about, and I'm a little bit I've stayed a little bit away from it. Yeah, I think the classic, if you're really traditional economist, would say economic incentives are important. It makes people work hard so that they can be rewarded for their hard work. So it's not just for social justice, it probably is good for efficiency, and you want to so the reward proportional to performance, for contribution, productivity. If you measure income as a measure of productivity, then that's probably is good in the more classical sense. If you remove the inequality, remove incentives, and that's bad for economy. The only problem is that in my work on income equality, we have been quite critical of economists' approach, in part because we find, I can give you another lecture on determinants of inequality, because we find many non-market factors in income equality. Some are political institutions. Hukou, for example, if you have efficient market, Hukou shouldn't matter. Hukou is a political institution and it's a non-market forces. And so in some ways, you do see the importance of non-market factors, such as Hukou, such as political capital. So you have inefficient allocation of resources. And also you have Danwei is very, very important. Danwei is important everywhere, but Danwei is more important in China than elsewhere. You know examples. If you in higher education, I don't know how many people have worked with Chinese universities. It's pretty much guaranteed in the same field with the same level of accomplishment, say assistant professor, tenure track, or established professor. if you're employed by Peking University versus, say, normal university, a regional normal university, you have same level of accomplishment, same level of productivity, every objective criteria is the same, you're paid much higher at Peking University, maybe twice as much. And that is really not market. When they hire you, they just have a standard package that's undifferentiated. So 户口 单位, and if you're affiliated with a high status 单位, you automatically enjoy privilege. You have boundary benefit of belonging to a particular locale. Shenzhen government, for example, can give you more money than another regional government, and that is really locale. That we consider that non-market forces. Same for political capital. We find that political capital contributes a lot to wealth, and that is partly through a redistribution of housing, a lot of distributions within system, within government system, and it's not necessarily market-based. You cannot buy hukou. You can, but you cannot legally buy hukou. You cannot really buy your membership within a government branch called 体制 system. And those things are non-market forces. So in general, I disagree with economists. I think a lot of unequal distribution of income is not market-based, is not efficient based on contribution. Rather, non-market forces are at play in China to a large extent.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the very interesting talk. So I studied gender inequalities in academia, so I read your previous paper. So my question is that how would you comment the gender gaps in China compared with other countries in academia or beyond academia?
Yeah, gender is a very important topic for China studies today. First of all, education, I don't have the chart. I deleted one of the charts to be faster today. Educational attainment of women surpassed educational attainment of men in China. This is true in America. This is true in many other places. It's a rise of women. I think the rise of women is also true in China. And that is mostly in educational attainment, from bachelor's, master's, to PhD. Women's educational attainment is pretty high. Early career development is also comparable, is actually superior for women. Women's performance is quite good. So it is only at a very high levels of management you see men. So male domination is still true in political arena. Look at Politburo composition, high level, very high level political structure. You see gender imbalance. And I think it will, over time, it will change. Part of the reason is actually family. Women still bear the burden of raising a child. It's a child-centered family structure, and women contribute far more to household production. If you use Becker's specialization model, women do more than men in household production, from household work to childcare to a lot of other things. So women still contribute a lot as part of family income, but are less competitive at highest level, both in political leadership, in academic leadership. So you do see gender inequality at a highest level. And some of that is attributed to family division of labor within family, between husband and wife. Wife cannot leave home as much as husband. They will do more housework. They are more responsible for children's education and so on. So they are less, in terms of time input, you can see from time input, we have hours worked. They're less than likely to overwork than men, for example. So some of the household dynamics. There's also a legacy of discrimination against women in the culture. I think some of that is still persists over time. But still, you have to compare China to other countries. Compared to Japan, for example, China has been remarkable in women's progress. Women still is a country where women's work outside the house is limited. There are even education in elite schools, in the most prestigious schools like the University of Tokyo, is not as high as men. They sometimes stay away, women stay away from elite selective schools in order to be good wife and mother. But that's not true in China. If you have a chance to go Beida, Tsinghua, they always go, and they worry about consequences for marriage later. So they're still much more career ambitious in China than elsewhere. So I actually, overall, for labor market, not for political structure, that's hard to predict, but for labor market, I see women making huge contributions in China. That's actually China's advantage over other countries. A part of that is due to communist revolution. So compared to America, compared to Japan, compared to other countries, women's leadership in the economy and contribution to the economy, also in scientific accomplishment, has been quite remarkable. If you look at Asian Americans, another example, if you see immigrants to the US, women take up a larger proportion and also are highly recognized in American academia. They're just very, very good. So gender favors in China and China's economy because women are so good, contribute a lot.
Any more questions from the audience?
Thank you so much for the inspiring talk. Actually, your answer partly addressed my question, but it's about, I think, comparison between all these East Asia development economies. China is not yet overcome the middle income trap, but as you already pointed out, the gender equality and also all this. My question is whether or not your suggestion seems that China is not going, despite a relatively aging population and demographic challenges, they are not going to resemble some of the issues observed in all these East Asia developing economies. Apart from gender, apart from the cultural tolerance, and apart from maybe the relatively stabilized social mobility, do you see any way, I mean, from your or more recent data to see that kind of trajectory that may allow China to overcome these kind of challenges, actually, because China is not yet developed it, but facing some of the issues at the time when those developed economy face. And second, a very minor question because you are on methodology, because you show consistency between all these survey, and because it's really a public good for us. I think the colleagues may be used to study the phenomenon you described. But do you see any variance? I mean, in terms of apart from consistency, because your data seems to be a panel data, how does it differ from other general social survey in China? Can you tell a little bit more about that? Thank you.
I'm not a development economist, so, but let me try to address the first question. So I think sometimes people will use terms, I think sometimes those terms are superficial to me, and because each country's economic development trajectory is unique. If you ask me whether China is in middle income trap, my answer is probably not. I think it's too easy to say China is middle income because other middle income countries are being trapped and China will be trapped. China's economic trajectory is very, very different from Latin American countries. For example, Brazil. Brazil's education is very, very low. Yeah, most of them don't have college education. They don't even have high school education. And China's education is very, very high. Chinese universities are very good. Science and technology, if we think about distribution of economy, China's high-tech industry is pretty well developed. I also study AI, I study science and technology in China. China is not a dependent economy. In some ways, it's a full-fledged economy because of the size, because of human capital base. China doesn't rely as much on U.S. as other countries, what's called middle-income countries in Latin America. So people always said that China's economy is collapsed and will slow down for a number of reasons. Yeah, there are a lot of issues facing China. I'm not really an economist. Real estate is a big thing. I think it's also local government debt is a real thing. So those are, and also inefficiency in allocating resources at the macro level, because this government plays a key role in allocating resources, more centralized government spending than before, and so on. So you have a state and non-state sector. You also have an export. So it's a very complicated story. But I look at individuals, families. I'm quite optimistic about China's economy. People work hard. Youth work hard, even though they say 躺平, lie flat. But if you talk to people, observe individuals, they are still ambitious. They are still want their children to do well. Those with low education want to have high education. Those from poor families, they want themselves to be well off. So ambition is there, hard working is there, human capital accumulation is there. If you look at number of hours they work, Chinese work harder than any other country in the world. This is just, if you work hard, if you have peace, you have a market, it's hard to believe China's economy is going to collapse because they all work hard. You look at number of hours, you look at their subjective expectation for themselves, they do quite well. So I think China, I'm not pessimistic about China's economy, in part because if you look at high-tech, AI, and they're doing quite well. And the other question is about data consistency. This is a chart we compare survey data from 4 independent institutions. I'm mainly responsible for CFPS conducted by Peking University, but also I provide advisory role to other surveys, Zhongshan, Renda, and Xinan Caida, and so on. So I have this. Those are independent samples implemented by different teams, and we get very similar results. We sometimes also check out results against data from National Bureau of Statistics. So all data are problematic. No data is perfect. So what you do is try to triangulate results across different data sources, including qualitative data. I'm a quantitative sociologist, but I read qualitative, and I go to China, I talk to people, not just use data. I talk to young people about their marriage, about their income, about their well-being, and so on. I think data could take different forms, including qualitative ones. So I think if you study China, you need to spend time in China. You need to collect data from different sources and verify your results. So part of the reason we have collect data, also longitudinal data, is because we don't have confidence in single data source. We do use data from different sources. We conduct experiment. We continue to collect data from different sources. And I also use data from other sources. One result, for example, use census data. The assorted mating is based on Chinese census data.
Okay, so due to time limit, we can entertain one last question. Okay, if there's... Oh.
So, Professor, I'm very fascinated by your last slide about the experimental cohort slide. If you could show that again. About what is attractive to male and females. I want to be very practical about this.
Which one?
The last one, yeah. What is attractive to women? What is right here, right? Yeah, so look at this. I'm a policy person. Look at this. Immediately, I'm thinking of several things. Number one, all men need to do plastic surgery, right? So that's why it's so popular, right? Joking aside, but if you look at some of the macro situation in China, right? we have housing bubble, a housing crisis now, and other real estate companies are bankrupting, etc. But at the same time, I learned that the local governments are buying up, right? And so is it possible, and then housing is such an important thing to address inequality issues, and people look for people who have housing, right? If that's the case, will that be the solution that basically the national government subsidizing local governments to buy up all the empty housing, finish the projects, and then redistribute as public housing to the young people? If you solve that problem, there's a major factor, right? First of all, it's a significant redistribution of wealth from those real estate guru companies to the hands of the government, and then through the hands of government to the local people. And then you solve the housing problem, they get married and have children. Would that be the solution, the positive solution to this problem?
Yes, in some ways, providing housing will increase marriage rate. I think that is true. However, some of the overbuilt is local. So in Huizhou and others, that might be overbuilt. In Shanghai and Beijing, they're still not overbuilt. The prices stay pretty high. So part of the market is, again, if economists, it's the supply and demand, and real estate is local. Location is local. So some of the mismatch is a local level. In countryside, they have a lot of housing, and marriage rate is high. But in Hong Kong, in Shanghai, in Beijing, and Shenzhen, housing is much more expensive. And also, even with reduced housing now than before, compared to income level, it's still most expensive in the world compared to income. So a lot of that, this is kind of interesting, a lot of the housing costs in Shanghai and Beijing, Beijing, for example, is really borne, the cost is paid for by parents. So it's like Beijing sucks money from, and Shenzhen too, from all over China, because parents help pay for the housing cost of the children who go to Shenzhen, who go to Beijing, and so on. And that money is still limited because older generation, they're retired and the money is limited. So overbuild is overbuild, the housing cost went out of hand. So in the long term, I agree that lower housing cost or government public housing will increase marriage rate, will increase fertility. That is true. But some of that is just not housing, and another is education. So there's three main sources of cost. One, housing, education, and retirement. And China is aging, and aging population requires elderly care. And this is the demographics has not kicked in. So in the long term, health care for the elderly will also put a burden on China's economy. But housing is just one of the factors, not the only factor. Education will be another one, and that will not be reduced anytime soon.
Well, thank you again for such a thought-provoking lecture and for sharing your insights with the audience by answering all those questions. Then as a token of our appreciation, I would like to invite Professor Alfred Ho, the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Science, to present the souvenir to Professor Xie. It's an old-style thermal with the logo of CTU.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so the distinguished lecture is over. And feel free to stay around if you want to, engage in further discussion with Professor Xie a bit.